rather suspect that was the media's interpretation of that particular deal.
What's your
Who
sense
knows
of it?
who came up with that idea?
Is there a different sense? Do you have
It's not really a subject of conversation that I would even go down. A historical perspective, which is slightly different.
A royal earthquake just shattered everything you thought you knew. Meghan Markle was ready to destroy the palace with her most explosive threats yet, promises of dark secrets that would end the monarchy forever. The evidence is absolutely devastating, and when you hear what it is, you'll never look at Meghan the same way again. From her home in Montecito, California, Meghan has been making moves that suggest a significant shift in strategy. Those who have followed her journey since stepping back from royal duties in 2020 will recognize a departure from her earlier approach.
How much loss he suffered. But I knew that if I didn't say it, that I would do it. And I just didn't.
The tone has changed. Where once there were carefully worded statements about personal struggles and institutional challenges, there now appears to be something more direct, more confrontational. Reports suggest that Meghan has been working on new media projects that take a harder line when discussing her time within the royal family. Multiple entertainment industry sources have noted that her recent appearances and promotional materials carry a different energy. She no longer seems content to position herself primarily as someone who suffered in silence. Instead, there are references to untold stories, to information that has not yet been made public, to truths that she suggests remain deliberately hidden. This shift comes at a particular moment in Meghan's career. The lucrative partnerships with major streaming platforms that once seemed so promising have not materialized in the way many expected. Several high-profile deals have either been scaled back or ended altogether. Public interest, which was intense in the immediate aftermath of her departure from royal life, has proven difficult to sustain at those initial levels. The podcast ventures, the production deals, the various content initiatives have faced mixed reception at best. Industry analysts have pointed out that the market for royal commentary and personal revelation has its limits. American audiences, initially fascinated by the insider perspective Meghan offered, have shown signs of moving on to other topics. The challenge of remaining relevant in an oversaturated media landscape is real, and it affects even those with stories as compelling as hers. Against this backdrop, the decision to adopt a more aggressive stance makes a certain kind of sense. When softer approaches yield diminishing returns, the natural inclination is to raise the stakes. Meghan's recent statements have done exactly that. She has spoken about systematic problems within the institution, about patterns of behavior that she characterizes as deeply troubling, about evidence she claims to possess that would paint a very different picture of life behind palace walls. What makes this situation particularly noteworthy is the response from London, or rather, the lack of one. The British royal family has long operated according to a principle often summarized as never complain, never explain. This doctrine of dignified silence has served the royal institution through countless controversies over the decades. But in this case, the silence feels different. It is not the silence of an organization choosing to ignore criticism. It carries a weight that observers have found difficult to interpret. Prince Harry stands at the center of this situation in a particularly complex position. He has aligned himself fully with his wife, appearing alongside her in various media settings and backing her characterization of events. For Harry, this appears to be a continuation of a pattern that began years ago. He has repeatedly drawn parallels between the treatment of his wife and the treatment of his mother, Princess Diana, by both the press and the institution itself. Those who have analysed Harry's public statements note a deep conviction in his words. He speaks with the certainty of someone who believes he is protecting his family from forces that have caused harm before. His decision to support Meghan so publicly and so completely has created what some describe as a point of no return. Each interview, each statement, each endorsement of his wife's perspective adds another layer to a narrative that grows more difficult to walk back with each passing month. The situation has begun to draw attention beyond the usual royal watching community. Diplomatic observers have noted unusual activity, quiet conversations happening at levels where personal family disputes do not typically register. When individual grievances start touching on questions of institutional legitimacy, when allegations begin to suggest cover-ups at the highest levels, the matter moves into different territory entirely. Meghan's approach has been described by media strategists as high risk. She is betting everything on her ability to control the narrative, to be believed, to have her version of events accepted by enough people that it fundamentally alters how the royal family is perceived. The stakes could hardly be higher. Success would mean vindication, reclaiming of public sympathy, and potentially a springboard to new opportunities. Failure would mean something close to the opposite. What is striking about this moment is how it represents a collision between two very different operating systems. On one side, there is the approach favoured by Meghan and Harry: direct engagement with media, willingness to share personal details, use of modern platforms, and storytelling techniques to build connection with audiences. On the other side, there is the centuries-old institution of the British monarchy, with its emphasis on discretion, its preference for allowing time to diffuse controversies, its faith in the power of simply carrying on with duty. The California base from which Meghan operates represents more than just a geographic location. It symbolises a different set of values, a different understanding of how public figures should engage with their audiences. In the American context, particularly in entertainment industry circles, authenticity is often measured by willingness to share, to be vulnerable, to tell one's truth without reservation. The more personal the revelation, the more genuine it is perceived to be. This creates a fundamental tension. What reads as honesty and courage in one context can appear as a breach of privacy and loyalty in another. What seems like standing up for oneself in one cultural framework might be interpreted as attacking family in another. Neither side is necessarily wrong in their assumptions. They are simply operating from different premises about what is appropriate, what is fair, what is necessary. The media offensive that Meghan has launched is comprehensive. It is not limited to a single interview or one documentary project. Multiple platforms are being utilized, multiple formats explored. Social media posts hint at revelations to come. Promotional materials for upcoming projects promise unprecedented access and honesty. The message is clear, and it is that there is more to the story than has been told, and that she is prepared to tell it. This strategy requires momentum. Once you begin making promises about explosive revelations, you must deliver on them or risk losing credibility entirely. The audience that has been promised the truth will not remain patient indefinitely. This creates pressure, a need to continually escalate, to keep providing material that justifies the dramatic framing. Harry's role in all of this cannot be understated. His presence legitimizes the narrative in ways that would be impossible otherwise. He is not just supporting his wife's claims. He is a primary source, someone who lived within the institution, who knows its workings from the inside. When he speaks about dysfunction or problems or mistreatment, it carries weight that no outside observer could match. His willingness to break with his family publicly makes the situation feel genuinely serious rather than merely sensational. While the media storm raged from California, a very different kind of response was taking shape in London. At the heart of it was Princess Anne, a figure who has spent decades operating largely outside the spotlight that follows other members of the royal family. Unlike her brothers, Anne has cultivated a reputation built not on charisma or public charm, but on quiet competence and unwavering dedication to duty. She is known for completing more royal engagements than almost any other family member, year after year, without fanfare or expectation of praise. Anne's approach to royal life has always been notably different. She has little patience for a ceremony that serves no purpose, for protocol that exists only for its own sake. Those who work with her describe someone who values efficiency and directness. She does not waste time on pleasantries when there is work to be done. This practical nature, combined with a sharp intelligence that those close to her emphasize, makes her a formidable presence within the family structure. From the very beginning, from the moment Meghan Markle entered the picture in 2018, Anne maintained a certain distance. While others in the family seemed eager to welcome the American actress, to celebrate the modernization she represented, Anne's response was notably more reserved. This was not based on prejudice or resistance to change. Rather, it reflected her general skepticism toward anyone new entering the highly unusual world of royal life, regardless of their background. Those early interactions, though polite, lacked the warmth that characterized Meghan's reception from other family members. Anne has never been someone who performs enthusiasm she does not feel. Her courtesy is impeccable, but it comes without the overlay of false intimacy. Some interpreted this as coldness, others saw it as honesty. Anne has never seemed particularly concerned with which interpretation people chose. What is significant, according to those familiar with the situation, is that Anne began noticing inconsistencies quite early on. Small things at first. Details in stories that did not quite align from one telling to another. References to experiences or achievements that seemed to shift slightly depending on the audience or context. None of these observations were dramatic in isolation. But Anne has a reputation for exceptional memory, for retaining details that others might overlook or forget. The initial background checks conducted when Meghan was preparing to marry into the family were, by most accounts, thorough but not exhaustive. There was an institutional desire to move forward, to embrace the positive narrative of a modern royal wedding. Harry was deeply in love and protective of his relationship. The public mood was celebratory. In that environment, certain questions that might have been pressed harder in other circumstances were instead set aside. Anne appears to have disagreed with this approach, though she kept her concerns largely private. The royal family operates on principles of unity and discretion, especially in personal matters. Publicly undermining a new family member, particularly one who had not yet done anything overtly problematic, would have been seen as inappropriate. So Anne watched and waited, maintaining her reservations, but not acting on them in any official capacity. The background materials that were compiled at the time covered the expected areas: employment history, financial status, legal issues, anything that might present obvious red flags. But the checks were conducted within a relatively short time frame, and they were balanced against a need to respect privacy. Meghan's life before Harry was her own business, the thinking went, as long as nothing in it presented a clear problem for the institution. Some of the details that emerged during those checks raised minor questions. The nature of certain professional relationships, the sources of funding for image-building activities before her relationship with Harry became public, connections to media figures and public relations professionals that seemed perhaps more extensive than one might expect. But these were not smoking guns. They were ambiguities, areas where the full picture was unclear. In the years that followed, as tensions developed and eventually erupted into public conflict, Anne's early skepticism began to look more like prescience. The breakdown of the relationship between the Sussexes and the rest of the family happened gradually, then suddenly. What began as reported disagreements about approach and priority escalated into something far more serious. By the time Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, the fracture was undeniable. Throughout this period, Anne maintained her characteristic distance from the drama. She did not participate in the public speculation, did not offer comments to the press, did not take sides in any visible way. But privately, according to sources close to the situation, she was paying attention. The patterns she had noticed early on appeared to be repeating and intensifying. The inconsistencies in storytelling, the careful management of public perception, the strategic use of media relationships, all of it seemed to be part of a larger pattern. When Meghan and Harry gave their explosive interview in 2021, making serious allegations about their treatment within the family, the institution's response was measured. The famous statement noting that recollections may vary was widely analysed for its careful wording, its refusal to engage directly with specific claims while also not accepting them as straightforward fact. Anne was reportedly supportive of this approach. Direct rebuttal would only extend the news cycle and create a he said, she said situation that served no one's interests. But the situation did not end there. Over the following years, more interviews followed, more projects, more revelations. Each new wave brought renewed attention and fresh allegations. The strategy of dignified silence began to face questions. How long can you remain silent in the face of repeated public attacks? At what point does silence begin to look like either guilt or weakness? Anne's view, according to those familiar with her thinking, was that silence remained the correct approach, but only if it was backed by something more substantial. Silence without preparation is simply avoidance. Silence with preparation is strategy. The difference lies in whether you are ready to respond if the situation escalates beyond a certain point. The decision to conduct a more thorough review of the historical record appears to have been made sometime in the past year. This was not announced publicly, not framed as an investigation in any formal sense. It was simply a decision to look more carefully at materials that had been compiled years earlier, to examine gaps in the record, to follow threads that had been left dangling during the initial vetting process. Anne's involvement in this process was not as the primary investigator, but as the driving force behind it. She understood that any such review needed to be comprehensive and completely defensible. It could not be a witch hunt or a vendetta. It needed to be a professional, thorough examination of facts, one that would stand up to scrutiny if its findings ever became public. The team assembled for this purpose included security professionals, legal advisors, and individuals with expertise in financial analysis. They were not tasked with proving a predetermined conclusion. They were asked to establish a complete and accurate picture of certain aspects of Meghan's background and activities, particularly in the period just before and after her entry into the royal family. What makes this significant is the shift it represents. For years, the family's approach had been reactive, responding to each new crisis as it emerged, but not taking proactive steps to establish a comprehensive understanding of the situation. Anne's initiative changed that. It moved from a posture of defense to one of preparation. The work was done quietly, without leaks to the press, without the knowledge of most family members. This was not about creating media counter-narratives or winning public relations battles. It was about establishing truth, about knowing with certainty what had actually happened, so that decisions could be made from a position of full information rather than partial understanding. Anne's motivation in driving this process appears to have been less about personal vindication and more about institutional protection. She has devoted her entire life to service of the Crown. The idea that the institution could be damaged by false narratives, that its legitimacy could be questioned based on incomplete or misleading information, was intolerable to her. Not because she believed the monarchy was perfect or above criticism, but because she believed criticism should be based on truth rather than manipulation. The investigation phase took time. Financial records needed to be obtained through proper channels. Interviews had to be conducted with individuals who had professional relationships with Meghan before and during her time as a working royal. Media relationships needed to be mapped and understood. None of this happened quickly, and all of it had to be done with absolute discretion to avoid tipping off those who might attempt to interfere or muddy the trail. As the quiet investigative work progressed in London, a clearer picture began to emerge of activities and relationships that had previously existed only as fragments in various files. The analysts working on the project started connecting dots that had seemed unrelated when examined in isolation. What they found was not a simple story of a woman entering royal life unprepared. Instead, they uncovered what appeared to be a far more calculated approach. The financial trails proved particularly revealing. Money, as investigators know, often tells a story that words try to conceal. In this case, the flow of funds into various projects and initiatives connected to Meghan's public image showed patterns that raise questions. Some of the money came from sources that were relatively straightforward, residuals from acting work, standard endorsement deals, but other streams were more difficult to trace, passing through multiple entities before arriving at their destination. Shell companies registered in jurisdictions known for their privacy protections appeared in the financial records. These are not illegal, and many people use such structures for legitimate privacy and tax planning purposes, but their presence made it difficult to determine who was actually funding certain activities. The public relations campaigns that began even before Meghan's relationship with Harry became widely known were extensive and expensive. Someone was paying for that work, and the question of who and why became relevant. The investigation also examined Meghan's professional relationships with various media figures and organizations. Again, having such relationships is not inherently problematic. Anyone working in entertainment would naturally develop a network of contacts in the media. But the nature and timing of some of these connections drew attention. There were contracts signed, agreements made that seemed to anticipate future access to royal life in ways that would only make sense if that access was already being planned for. One area that received particular scrutiny was the period between when Meghan's relationship with Harry became serious and when they officially married. During those months, standard security protocols would have been in place. Conversations within royal residences, meetings, family discussions, all of these would have occurred in spaces that were considered private and secure. Yet information from some of those private moments appeared to have made its way into media coverage, often with details that could only have come from someone who was present. The investigation examined whether there had been unauthorized recordings made during this period. Modern technology makes it remarkably easy to record conversations without detection. A smartphone in a handbag, a device that looks like a pen or a piece of jewelry, these tools are widely available and simple to use. Proving that such recordings were made years after the fact is nearly impossible without cooperation from the person who made them. But circumstantial evidence, patterns of information appearing in media that matched private conversations, suggested this as a possibility. What particularly troubled the investigators was the timeline. If the evidence they were gathering was accurate, then some of the groundwork for future media projects had been laid very early, possibly even before the marriage. This suggested a level of advanced planning that contradicted the narrative of someone who entered royal life hoping to serve and adapt, only to be driven away by mistreatment. Instead, it pointed towards someone who may have seen royal marriage as an opportunity for a specific kind of career development. The charitable work that Meghan engaged in during her time as a working royal also came under review. The causes she supported were generally worthy ones, and her public advocacy often seemed genuine. But the investigation looked at the organisational structures around some of these initiatives. Who was managing the media coverage? Who was ensuring that Meghan's involvement received maximum publicity? The answers led back to some of the same public relations entities that had been involved in her image building before the marriage. This created a picture of parallel operations. On one hand, there was the official royal charity work, coordinated through palace offices according to established protocols. On the other hand, there appeared to be a separate publicity operation running alongside it, ensuring that Meghan personally received credit and visibility in ways that went beyond what other working royals typically sought or received. The investigators also examined social media activity during the relevant period. The organic growth of support and interest is one thing, but there are also services that can be purchased to create the appearance of grassroots enthusiasm. Accounts can be created, content can be promoted, algorithms can be manipulated. All of this is part of modern digital marketing. The question was whether such techniques had been used to amplify Meghan's profile and create impressions of public sentiment that might not have been entirely genuine. Data analysis suggested that at least some of the apparent support Meghan received on social platforms showed characteristics consistent with coordinated campaigns rather than purely organic growth. Again, this is not illegal. Politicians and celebrities use such strategies routinely, but it was relevant to understanding how public perception had been shaped and who had been doing the shaping. While this work continued in London, in California, the dynamic between Harry and Meghan was following its own trajectory. Harry's public support for his wife had been absolute and unwavering. He appeared in interviews backing her version of events completely. He wrote a memoir that detailed his grievances with his family in extraordinary detail. He participated in documentary projects that presented a specific narrative about their relationship and their treatment by the institution. To observers of Harry's psychology during this period, what stood out was the intensity of his conviction. This was not someone grudgingly supporting a spouse because marriage required it. This was someone who genuinely believed every word he was saying. Harry had constructed a framework in his mind where he was protecting Meghan from the same forces that he believed had destroyed his mother. That parallel drove everything he did. Problem with such total conviction is that it leaves no room for doubt, no space to question whether the narrative one has accepted might be incomplete or manipulated. Harry had cast himself as the hero in a story of rescue and protection. Meghan was the victim he was saving. The royal family and the British press were the villains. Once that framework was established, every piece of new information was interpreted to fit within it. Friends and former colleagues of Harry noted the change in him over the years. The prince they had known was often willing to see multiple sides of situations, to laugh at himself, to maintain connections even with people he disagreed with. That flexibility seemed to have vanished. In its place was a rigidity, a certainty that often characterizes people who have made dramatic life changes and cannot allow themselves to question whether those changes were wise. Harry's statements in various media appearances showed certain patterns. He would repeat specific phrases and framings almost verbatim across different interviews. This suggested either very thorough media training or a narrative that had been carefully workshopped and refined. The spontaneity that had once been part of his public appeal was largely gone, replaced by talking points delivered with passion, but also with notable consistency. What Harry apparently did not know, could not have known given the secrecy of the investigation, was that many of his most heartfelt defenses of Meghan were based on information she had provided him, information that was now being examined for accuracy. He believed he was speaking truth to power. The investigation suggested he might instead be repeating carefully constructed fictions. The tragedy of Harry's position, as some analysts saw it, was precisely this disconnect between his subjective experience and objective reality. To him, everything he said felt true because it matched his understanding of events. He had no reason to doubt Meghan's account of private conversations, private moments of mistreatment, private instances of racism or cruelty. He was not present for all of them, but she was his wife and he trusted her completely. This trust made him an ideal spokesperson for her narrative. When Harry spoke about the pain he witnessed Meghan enduring, his emotion was genuine. His anger at his family for what he believed they had done was real. The fact that some of what he believed might have been shaped or exaggerated, or in some cases fabricated, did not change the sincerity of his feelings. He was a true believer, which made him devastatingly effective. The investigators in London, as they compiled their findings, recognized this dynamic. Harry was not seen as a willing participant in any deception. He was understood to be someone who had been provided with a version of reality and accepted it without the skepticism he might have applied had the information come from anyone other than his wife. His role was tragic, rather than villainous. He had become the most credible witness for claims that the investigation was finding increasingly difficult to substantiate. One particularly concerning finding related to therapy and mental health support. Both Harry and Meghan had spoken publicly about seeking help, about the importance of therapy, about the mental health struggles they faced. This advocacy was generally praised as helping reduce stigma around these issues. But the investigation examined the timeline of when professional help was supposedly requested versus when it was supposedly denied, and found inconsistencies. Medical records and communications with royal household staff told a different story than what had been presented publicly. Offers of support appeared to have been made that were later characterized as refusals. Resources that were provided were subsequently described as inadequate or inappropriate. The gap between what the records showed and what had been claimed publicly was significant. This discrepancy was particularly important because mental health and allegations of insufficient support in that area had been central to the public case against the royal family. If those claims were exaggerated or false, it fundamentally changed the moral calculus of the entire situation. It shifted the narrative from one of institutional cruelty to one of something quite different. As the investigation progressed, Princess Anne received regular updates. She did not involve herself in the day-to-day work, but she reviewed the findings as they accumulated. What she saw confirmed her long-standing suspicions, but also exceeded them. The level of planning, the sophistication of the media management, the careful construction of a public narrative designed to serve specific purposes, all of it pointed to something far more deliberate than spontaneous conflict between strong personalities. The meeting that took place in a secure room within the palace complex was not recorded in any official schedule. No minutes were taken, no formal agenda distributed in advance. The gathering included only those individuals whose roles made their presence absolutely necessary. Senior members of the household staff, legal advisors with decades of experience navigating sensitive institutional matters, and a handful of family members whose discretion was beyond question. Princess Anne presided over the proceedings with the calm authority that had defined her decades of service. The presentation of findings began not with emotion or accusation, but with data. Financial records were displayed, showing the movement of money through various corporate structures. Each transaction was documented, each entity identified as far as possible, given the opacity of some of the offshore arrangements. The picture that emerged was of a sophisticated operation, one that required both planning and resources to execute. This was not amateur hour. Whoever had designed these structures understood how to move money in ways that obscured its origins and purposes. The contracts came next, agreements signed under pseudonyms or through intermediaries, arrangements with media organizations and public relations firms that predated public knowledge of Meghan's relationship with Harry. Some of these agreements included language about future content, about access to exclusive information, about opportunities that would only exist if certain conditions were met. Reading them in hindsight, knowing what had transpired, the documents took on a significance that would not have been apparent at the time they were signed. One particularly revealing contract outlined terms for what was described as reality-based content about life within a major public institution. The agreement was dated months before Meghan and Harry's engagement was announced. The implications were clear enough that no one in the room needed them spelled out. This suggested that plans for eventual media projects based on royal life were being made while Meghan was still very much part of that royal life, still undertaking official duties, still presenting herself as committed to the role. The social media analysis proved equally illuminating. Charts showed the growth of various accounts supporting Meghan, the patterns of posting and sharing, the coordination of messaging across multiple platforms. Experts in digital marketing had reviewed the data and found characteristics that indicated professional management rather than purely organic support. Bot activity, coordinated amplification, strategic timing designed to dominate news cycles during key moments, all of it pointed to resources being deployed to shape public perception. The room remained silent as these findings were presented. The individuals present were not prone to shock or surprise. They had seen their share of scandals and crises over the years, but the comprehensiveness of what was being revealed, the extent to which this appeared to have been planned rather than reactive, clearly registered. This was not a case of someone who had entered royal life in good faith and been disappointed. This appeared to be something closer to an extraction operation, a deliberate plan to gain access, gather material, and eventually leverage it for personal benefit. The evidence regarding private conversations proved more circumstantial, but still compelling. Investigators had compiled instances where specific details from private family interactions had appeared in media coverage, sometimes within days of the conversations taking place. The level of detail in some cases could only have come from someone who was present. While direct proof of unauthorized recordings was not available, the pattern was suggestive enough to raise serious concerns about whether privacy had been systematically violated. Princess Anne spoke sparingly during the presentation, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Her approach was methodical rather than emotional. She wanted everyone in the room to understand the full scope of what had been uncovered, to see the pattern as clearly as she now saw it. This was not about personal grievance, this was about protecting an institution that had survived far worse than one individual's ambitions, but only by taking threats seriously when they emerged. The final section of the presentation dealt with what investigators described as the long game. Documents suggested planning for an eventual departure from royal duties, for establishing an independent brand, for building a media empire that would be positioned as the authentic alternative to official royal narratives. The timing of various initiatives, the sequencing of announcements and revelations. All of it appeared to follow a strategic plan rather than emerging from genuine grievances. Most troubling was evidence of what appeared to be a deliberate strategy to position Harry as estranged from his family in ways that would maximize the value of future tell-all projects. The more complete the break, the more dramatic the story. The deeper the conflict, the more marketable the narrative. If this analysis was correct, then some of the public attacks on the royal family were not expressions of hurt feelings, but calculated moves in a longer game designed to create exactly the kind of dramatic arc that would sustain multiple books, interviews, and documentaries. The implications for Harry were particularly painful for those who knew him. If the evidence was accurate, then he had been used in the most fundamental way possible. His genuine love for his wife, his real trauma around his mother's death, his legitimate frustrations with aspects of royal life, all of it had been recognized and exploited by someone who understood exactly which emotional buttons to push. Harry's sincerity had been weaponized against him, turned into the most effective tool for selling a narrative he believed he was creating, when in fact it had been crafted for him. When the presentation concluded, there was no immediate rush to judgment or calls for dramatic action. The people in that room understood that what they knew and what they could prove publicly were two different things. Much of the evidence, while compelling, was also circumstantial or protected by privacy considerations that made it difficult to deploy without causing more harm than good. The question was not whether they believed what they had been shown. The question was what to do with that belief. The decision that emerged from the discussion was strategic rather than vindictive. There would be no public release of the findings, no press conference laying out the evidence. Such an approach would be seen as an attack on Meghan and Harry, would be dismissed as the establishment protecting itself, would ultimately backfire by generating sympathy for the couple. Instead, the evidence would be preserved, properly documented, and secured, ready to be used if circumstances required it, but not deployed preemptively. More importantly, certain quiet actions would be taken. The networks that had been supporting Meghan's media operations, the financial flows that sustained her projects, the relationships with key industry figures, all of this could be disrupted without any public announcement. Phone calls could be made, information could be shared with people who had business relationships with the Sussexes, concerns could be raised about liability and accuracy. None of this would be traceable back to the palace directly, but the effect would be unmistakable. The power of the evidence lay not in its public deployment, but in its existence. Meghan had been making increasingly bold claims about dark truths and hidden information she possessed. The investigation had revealed that the palace now held far more devastating material than she did. The balance of power in any potential escalation had shifted completely. She could threaten to reveal damaging information, but anything she released would be met with questions about its accuracy and context, questions that could now be answered with documentary evidence if necessary. In the days and weeks following that meeting, observers of the situation began to notice changes. Meghan's media presence, which had been building toward what seemed like another major offensive, suddenly quieted. Projects that had been announced or rumored seemed to stall. The aggressive posture that had characterized her recent approach gave way to something more cautious. There were no public statements explaining this shift. It simply happened. Those with knowledge of what had transpired in that secure room understood what they were witnessing. Meghan had received messages through various channels, not direct communications from the palace, but information from people she trusted in the industry. The substance of those messages was that continuing down the path she had been on would be catastrophic. People who had been supporting her projects were now having second thoughts. Questions were being raised about the accuracy of various claims. Lawyers were advising caution. The realization that the palace had conducted a comprehensive investigation and now possessed detailed evidence appears to have been sobering. Meghan's entire strategy had been built on the assumption that the royal family would never really fight back, that their commitment to discretion and dignity would prevent them from deploying whatever information they might have. The discovery that this assumption was wrong, that evidence had been gathered and could be used if necessary, fundamentally changed the calculus. For Harry, the situation was more complex and more painful. Information began reaching him, not through official channels, but through people who cared about him, suggesting that some of what he had been told and had believed might not be entirely accurate. The cognitive dissonance this created was immense. He had burned bridges with his family based on his conviction that Meghan had been mistreated. He had said things publicly that could not be unsaid. The possibility that his understanding of events might be flawed was almost too devastating to contemplate. The silence that settled over Montecito was different from the silence in London. The palace's silence was strategic, backed by evidence and maintained by choice. Meghan's silence appeared to be enforced by necessity, by the recognition that further escalation would trigger the release of information she could not afford to have made public. It was the silence of someone who had been playing poker with what she thought was an unbeatable hand, only to discover that her opponents had been holding better cards all along and had simply been waiting for the right moment to show them. Princess Anne, reviewing reports of this new quiet from across the Atlantic, allowed herself no sense of triumph. She had not undertaken this effort for personal satisfaction. The goal had been to protect the institution, and that goal had been achieved. Meghan had been neutralized as a threat not through public confrontation, but through the simple demonstration that the truth, when properly documented and preserved, remained the most powerful weapon available. The war that had seemed poised to tear the family apart had ended not with explosion, but with the recognition by all parties that continued conflict served no one's interests.